Last night on PhillySportsNetwork.com, I published a report. I received some information in the evening stating that there had been some recent interest around cornerback Rasul Douglas that actually led to a trade offer from one NFC team. And I want to get to that in this video because I structured that article, I structured the headline a very certain way. Because one, I didn't want to come off as clickbait, and two, I don't want to play that card, but unfortunately when it comes to source-related content, I tend to veer away from it, purely because a lot of people immediately discredit me because I'm British, and normally I don't mind, but on the last couple of occasions where I have put stuff out, my mentions on Twitter just come with a flurry of abuse from accounts I've never heard of, just purely because I'm British and I'm posting content about the Eagles. Kind of disregarding the fact that in England we do actually have mobile phones and laptops and email. I know we've just got running water, but give us time, we are catching up to you. But it's always kind of thrown me off guard. Like, I'm not that easy to get to in terms of like insults and stuff. I love the tea and crumpets insults. I kind of like it when people come after my appearance because at least it means my content's good. But I think there's a difference between me making one of those comments my Twitter headers and then just getting a flurry of abuse and people talking with their mates and using all the laugh emojis, calling me a bum or that I'm British or whatever, like immediately discrediting someone's work because of where they're from. It just doesn't sit right with me. And last night when typing it up, I'm not gonna lie, mental health it, got a bit of anxiety, and I tried to kind of conceal as much information as I could within that article to avoid all the noise and the minefield that was bound to ensue. So, yeah, sorry for the kind of personal touch on it, but I thought it was important to get that out the way. The other thing I wanted to mention as well is that source-related material, as I've always said, always comes out with a purpose. There is a reason it's put into the media, and it's important to understand that, especially with this kind of thing. Because at the end of the day, the information may be 100% accurate, it could be partially accurate, but the reason it's put out will have some sort of knock-on effect for some party. For instance, if someone links to a reporter that a player is gaining major traction in the trade market, or an agent says there's a lot of potential suitors eyeing up this free agent, all it does is drive up the price, and it forces those teams that may be interested to take a second look and reevaluate what they may be willing to give up. That's very important. So without further ado, we're going to try and dissect the information that I put out last night, and then a little bit more as well, because there is more to that report. So buckle up, strap yourselves in. Thank you for listening to that first 2 minutes. I think it is really important just to be as transparent as I can with you, and let's get into the Rasul Douglas information. The Eagles have already been quite active in the trade market. They leveraged a trade for all-star cornerback Darius Slay, and then they've been frequently linked with names like Yannick Ngakoue, potential moves for Alshon Jeffrey, and most recently the idea that Rasul Douglas is being shopped. And this isn't the first time that this has come around, and unfortunately it kind of makes sense. I'm a big Rasul Douglas fan. I think that he probably could have been moved to safety a couple of years ago, but that ship has well and truly sailed, and despite the fact that he does continue to flash some of those nice traits in this system, the total lack of long speed does hurt him, and in my mind he embodies what looks to be a disconnect between the coaching staff and the front office, because every other cornerback on this roster is around 6 foot tall, a bit stockier, has a specific skill set. Douglas is 6'2", rangy wingspan, ball hawk, dominant at the catch point, but lacked other traits, although his tackling has come on leaps and bounds. I mean, I think this was probably more apparent in 2018, where the Eagles literally turned to Dexter McDougal off the street, who then ran into Jordan Hicks on a play before even giving Rasul Douglas a starting shot. There's just a bit of a disconnect between Schwartz and Douglas. It doesn't matter what Rasul Douglas does, or how well he performs whenever Ronald Darby goes down, or how much he even struggles for that matter, he can't seem to win a place on the field. So it makes sense that with Darius Slay in town, the Eagles are going to opt to try and move on from him. The question is, where are the suitors? Now, I heard a couple of separate murmurs and one big bit of insight. Now, the two murmurs essentially bleed into one, and that there are two AFC teams currently interested, or have at least voiced an interest in Rasul Douglas. Those are the Houston Texans and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Both had free agencies where they kind of gained a bit, lost a lot, gained a bit, and it's alright, but they could use some depth. And obviously, with the whole Yannick Ngakoue saga moving on, you can see why the Eagles may opt to try and keep Rasul Douglas around just a little bit longer toward the draft window to see if a team does bite for a part of a bigger trade. And obviously shipping him out of conference would probably make a bit more sense as well, because he's not going to present much of a threat. Just look at how they dealt Eric Rowe, the player he's turned into, just earned himself a nice new contract down in Miami after a nice stint with the Patriots. It keeps him out of the equation for as long as possible, because at the end of the day, he is a talented player. He has shown that he can thrive in the right scheme. I think he deserves a spot to start. He's not going to be a top 10 corner by any stretch anytime soon, but he does have enough potential to at least win some kind of rotation or starting role with another team where he's maybe going to be favoured as opposed to the odd one out. However, that doesn't mean that NFC teams aren't interested, and according to the source that I spoke to last night, the one team that actually voiced a real interest in Rasul Douglas were the San Francisco 49ers, so much so that they actually offered a trade to the Philadelphia Eagles, and the idea was that this was going to be a direct player swap, and the player mentioned was wide receiver Dante Pettis, someone who's 24 years old, entering his third year, but is in a bit of a tricky spot, similar to Rasul Douglas, only he's got the extra year. As a rookie, he had 467 yards, averaged 17.3 yards per reception, and scored 5 touchdowns. In his second year, in a year where he was supposed to break out as the #1 wide receiver, he did basically nothing. He had 109 yards in total, was actually inactive by the time the Super Bowl rolled around, and he just seems to have fallen dramatically out of favour with the coaching staff. And you go back and look at the breakout of a player such as Deebo Samuel, and you understand why they may be a little bit eager with a wide receiver class this deep to move on from someone who they just don't see eye to eye with, whether that's on a football level, in terms of mentality, or something else. And the Eagles, meanwhile, who covet a deep threat wide receiver, may be intrigued to kick the tyres on Pettis. The trouble is, though, that the Eagles haven't been outward in slamming Rasul Douglas. They've not been to the media saying he needs to pick up his physicality like they have with Sidney Jones or play through an injury, or hinting that he could be moved. I mean, Matt Maiocco recently after the DeForest Buckner trade said that that wouldn't be the last deal they made before the NFL draft. Potentially Dante Pettis being on the move, and that automatically creates leverage for the Eagles, who have a cornerback that I think is probably given more to the Eagles than Pettis has to the San Francisco 49ers. I can see how he wouldn't jump at the first hand that offers a deal. But then what really gets interesting is apparently the Eagles actually countered this and said, hey, do you know what? Don't worry about Dante Pettis, give us Matt Breida. And that unfortunately comes with its own complication, in that he was tendered recently with a second-round pick alongside wide receiver Kendrick Bourne, someone that vastly overtook Dante Pettis in terms of the depth chart. But he hasn't actually signed that tender yet as far as I'm aware, so he would have to very willingly want to go to the Eagles, which may have caused a complication. After a career year in 2018, Breida rushed for 623 yards 1 year later, still averaging over 5 yards per carry. Now, having lost Jordan Howard to the Dolphins, it's not hard to imagine the Eagles trying to push the envelope and swap a former third-round pick for the 25-year-old running back. Now, Breida is a little bit similar to a Miles Sanders type skill set. He's not your downhill north-south runner. He's explosive, makes great cuts, very instinctive as a runner, and would fit the zonal system perfectly. But I think, if anything, all it does is kind of push ahead of Boston Scott. Now, Breida isn't the most versatile back in the league, but as a change of pace back, I think he'd be perfect to be a nice complement to this backfield. But what about the Niners? Why would they want Rasul Douglas? Well, they brought back Jimmy Ward, which has eliminated the need for a direct starter, but the 28-year-old suffered a broken bone in 5 of his last 6 seasons. Richard Sherman will now be entering his contract year, and Akello Weatherspoon was benched at one point last season, which broke my heart because I loved him coming out of college. Some competitive depth makes sense here, and it would give Rasul Douglas a chance to try a different system, a different way of coaching, potentially learn for a year under Richard Sherman on a prove-it deal, and play his way to a longer-term future in a different state. Now, how much accuracy that is here, I don't know. It's been reported that the Niners had tried to ship Dante Pettis before, but had walked away, so that may be the same deal if we're to connect the dots. And we know Howie Roseman has become somewhat of a trade master. He won't just accept the first thing on the table, he will squeeze every drop of juice out of that trade until he has maximized the value. So at the very least, it sounds very logical, and I've got no reason to doubt the source that trusted me with this information. But either way, whether this trade happens, whether it's simply the Eagles trying to pump up the price, or the Niners potentially coming out and saying, hey, look, we are actively shopping these players and we're walking away, so they're not just going to be gimmies, because I think what the Niners have done is create this perception that both players aren't really in the team's long-term future, future, and by doing so will minimize that leverage. This kind of thing will create the opposite. If they're willing to walk away, it's saying, nah, you're not going to mug us off, we want a bit more from that. So I wanted to take a deeper dive into that trade. Hopefully this has given you guys much more of a clearer picture as to this situation, but I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you for sticking around. It'd be fantastic if you could hit that subscribe button. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's @LiamJenkinsPSN. I'll see you soon.